Becoming the King's Guard. A journey of courage and sacrifice. In the heart of a picturesque land, surrounded by winding rivers and lush greenery, lay a small village where life was simple but rich. The people who lived there were hardworking and resilient, shaped by their rugged surroundings and the challenges that came with living in a place like this. Among them were two young men, Kofi and Kwame, who had grown up together in this village. They had been inseparable since they were children, and their bond had only grown stronger over the years. They were like brothers, with a connection that went beyond friendship. Kofi was a tall and muscular young man, with broad shoulders and a chiseled physique that spoke of years of hard training. His skin was a deep, rich shade of chocolate, and his sharp features were accented by high cheekbones and full lips. His hair was cropped short, and his eyes were a bright, piercing shade of brown that seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. Kwame, on the other hand, was slightly shorter but no less strong or muscular. He had a leaner build than Kofi, with a quick and nimble grace that belied his strength. His skin was a warm, golden brown, and his features were more angular than Kofi's, with a sharp jawline and a narrow nose. His eyes were a deep, dark brown, almost black, and they shone with an inner fire that matched his determination. Together, Kofi and Kwame had grown up herding cattle on the village's outskirts, spending long days under the sun and sleeping under the stars. They had faced many challenges and overcome them together, forging a bond that was unbreakable. And now, as they stood on the threshold of a new adventure, they knew that they would face it together, as brothers. Kofi and Kwame lay on the ground, their eyes fixed on the starry sky above them. They were tired from their long day of training, but they were also excited about what lay ahead. "Can you imagine it, Kofi?" Kwame said dreamily. "Being chosen as one of the king's royal guards, serving the kingdom with honor and distinction. It would be a dream come true." Kofi smiled, his eyes shining with excitement. "I can imagine it, Kwame. It's all I've been thinking about since we started training. To be part of something greater than ourselves, to protect and serve our people. It's the ultimate honor." They lay there in silence for a few moments, lost in their thoughts and daydreams. The night was cool and peaceful, with only the sound of crickets chirping in the distance. "I wonder what it will be like," Kwame said after a while, breaking the silence. "To be a part of the king's court, to walk among the nobles and the wealthy. Will we still be ourselves, or will we have to change?" Kofi frowned, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know, Kwame. But I do know one thing, we won't change who we are. We will always be true to ourselves and to each other, no matter what." Kofi and Kwame had been preparing for years for the chance to join the ranks of the royal guards. It was the most prestigious position in all of the kingdom, a symbol of honor and respect. Only two young men were chosen every year, and the competition was fierce. From the day they turned 13, Kofi and Kwame had been training hard, both physically and mentally. They knew that this was their chance to prove themselves, to show the world what they were made of. They spent countless hours studying the ways of the royal guards, learning every technique, every strategy, and every trick of the trade. On the day of their departure, Kofi and Kwame's families woke up early to prepare food for their journey. They packed boiled yams and corned beef sandwiches, carefully wrapping them in leaves to keep them fresh. The boys' fathers and mothers hugged them tightly, telling them how proud they were and wished them good luck. They set off towards the capital city, their hearts full of hope and determination. Their families and friends stood at the entrance of the village waving goodbye, knowing that the boys were about to embark on a journey that would change their lives forever. As Kofi and Kwame arrived at the gate of the capital city, they saw thousands of other boys like them, all equally muscular and determined. The atmosphere was electric, and the air was thick with anticipation and nervous energy. The boys gave each other encouraging nods and smiles, knowing that the competition ahead of them would be tough. Suddenly, the room fell silent as Kojo entered with his friends. Kojo was a towering figure, with broad shoulders and bulging muscles that rippled beneath his shirt. His presence commanded respect, and there was a hushness that came over the room as he walked in. You could hear the whispers and murmurs of the other boys, as they realized that the competition had just become even tougher. They knew that Kojo was the son of the most decorated general in all of the land, and he had been training for this moment his entire life. The morning of the challenge was bright and clear, and the arena was packed with thousands of people from all over the kingdom. Kofi and Kwame were among the 2,500 young men who had come to compete for the coveted position of royal guard. As they waited nervously for the competition to begin, they noticed a commotion at the entrance to the arena. Suddenly, a trumpet sounded and the crowd erupted into cheers as Kwesi, a respected royal guard, made his dramatic entrance. Kwesi was a tall, imposing figure with a deep, commanding voice that echoed throughout the arena. He wore a suit of gleaming armor and carried a spear in his hand, and he strode confidently towards the center of the arena. Once he reached the center, Kwesi raised his spear and the crowd fell silent. "Young men of the kingdom," he boomed. "Welcome to the competition to become the king's royal guard. Today, you will be tested in 3 grueling challenges that will push you to your limits. Only the strongest, bravest, and most skilled among you will have what it takes to join our ranks." Kwesi paused for a moment to let his words sink in. Then he continued, "The first challenge is the endurance challenge. This will test your stamina, your strength, and your willpower. You will have to run a grueling obstacle course, climb a towering wall, and swim across a treacherous river. Only the top 100 performers will advance to the next round. Are you ready?" The crowd erupted into cheers once again, and Kofi and Kwame exchanged nervous glances. The endurance challenge sounded like a formidable test, but they were determined to give it their all. They took a deep breath and prepared to face the challenge head-on. Kwame turned to Kofi with a determined look on his face. "We've got this, brother," he said, clenching his fists. Kofi nodded, his eyes fixed on the gates that were about to open. The air was tense with anticipation as the boys waited for the signal to start. Suddenly, the trumpet sounded, and the gates began to creak open slowly. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as the boys took their first steps into the wilderness. Kofi and Kwame ran side by side, pushing themselves harder with each step, their hearts beating rapidly with excitement. As they navigated through the rough terrain, jumping over obstacles and dodging branches, the adrenaline rushed through their veins. The cheering of the crowd became a distant hum as they focused solely on the challenge at hand. The sound of rushing water grew louder as they approached the river. Kofi and Kwame reached the river, and as they stepped in, the cold water rushed up to their knees. The current was strong, and they had to lean into it with all their might to stay upright. They could see other boys being swept away downstream, struggling to keep their heads above the water. Kwame gritted his teeth as he fought against the current, his legs burning with exhaustion. Kofi pushed himself harder, his muscles straining as he pushed through the water. They could see Kojo up ahead, still going strong. As they reached the middle of the river, the current grew even stronger, and Kofi felt his feet slipping on the smooth rocks beneath him. He stumbled, but Kwame reached out and grabbed his arm, pulling him back up. They locked eyes for a moment, and Kofi nodded in gratitude. Together, they pushed forward, the water now up to their chests. They could hear the cheers of the crowd on the other side of the river, urging them on. With a final burst of energy, they made it to the other side, panting and shivering from the cold. They looked at each other, smiling in relief, knowing that they had overcome a major obstacle in the competition. As Kofi and Kwame approached the city, their legs burned and their lungs gasped for air. The sun was setting, and the cheers of the crowd grew louder with each passing step. They could see the finish line ahead, and their hearts beat faster in anticipation. But they were not alone. Other competitors limped and stumbled beside them, some even collapsing on the ground. It had been a grueling endurance challenge, and only the strongest had made it this far. Finally, they reached the finish line, and a wave of relief washed over them. As they were handed their numbers, 90 and 91, tears welled up in their eyes. They had made it. They were going to compete in the next challenge. As they watched the gates close behind the 100th competitor, they felt a sense of gratitude mixed with sadness for those who didn't make it. The atmosphere was both celebratory and mournful, as families embraced their sons who had made it and comforted those who had not. It was a powerful moment, one that Kofi and Kwame would never forget. The booming voice of Kwesi echoed through the arena, congratulating the winners of the first challenge. The crowd erupted in cheers, but their excitement was short-lived as Kwesi announced the second challenge. "The invention challenge," he bellowed. "In this challenge, you will be given a set of materials and tasked with building a useful invention that could be used by the kingdom. You must come up with a creative and functional design and present it to a panel of judges. The boys stood in shock as they realized that they would have to work in pairs and that 45 pairs would be eliminated. The tension in the air was palpable, and the crowd fell silent as Kwesi finished his announcement. At the end of 2 days, you will present your inventions to the Council of Elders, he said, his voice booming once again. Only the best will be chosen to move on to the final challenge. The boys were filled with a mix of excitement and dread as they contemplated the challenge ahead. They knew that this challenge would test their creativity, ingenuity, and problem-solving skills, and that failure was not an option. As they left the arena, they began to strategize and plan, determined to create the best invention the kingdom had ever seen. Kofi and Kwame sat down on the grassy field, surrounded by piles of materials. Kofi laughed and said, "I have an idea, let's build a flying boat." Kwame shook his head and replied, No, that's ridiculous. What about a hat that doubles as a fan to cool you down in the heat?" Kofi chuckled, "Okay, maybe that's not the best idea either. But what if we build a machine that can automatically water plants?" Kwame raised an eyebrow. "That's not a bad idea. But I was thinking, what if we build a bridge over the river we crossed in the first challenge? That way, other people won't have to struggle like we did." Kofi's eyes widened. "That's brilliant. We can use these logs and these ropes to build the foundation, and these planks to create the walking surface. Let's get to work." They worked tirelessly over the next 2 days, barely taking any breaks. They cut and shaped the logs, tied the ropes, and secured the planks in place. They had to make several adjustments along the way, but they never lost hope. On the day of the presentation, the arena was filled with the sound of laughter and ridicule, as various groups presented their silly inventions. One invention that caused much laughter was a pair of sandals, with built-in umbrellas to protect your feet from rain and mud. Kojo and his partner were the only ones who received a round of applause, which made Kofi and Kwame nervous as they waited for their turn. As they stepped onto the stage, the judges looked at their invention with skepticism. One of the judges spoke up, "A bridge? We've seen hundreds of bridges before. What makes yours so special?" Kwame stepped forward. "This bridge is not just any bridge. It's made of local materials that are easily accessible, which makes it affordable for any community to build. It's also designed to withstand strong currents and heavy loads, ensuring safety for anyone who crosses it." The judges looked at each other, impressed by Kwame's explanation. Kofi added, "Furthermore, this bridge has the potential to connect isolated communities, bringing people together and promoting economic growth." The judges nodded, impressed by the boys' idea. "Well done, Kofi and Kwame. You have shown creativity and practicality in your invention." The crowd cheered, and Kofi and Kwame felt a sense of relief and pride in their accomplishment. Kofi and Kwame had made it to the final round, where only 10 contestants remained. Kwesi addresses the group of competitors with a stern look on his face. "Congratulations on making it this far," he begins. "But the final challenge will be the toughest one yet. You will face off in a duel with swords, and only 2 of you will be declared the winners." Kofi and Kwame glanced at each other nervously. They had been preparing for this moment, but they still felt unprepared for what was to come. As they approach the board with the list of pairings, they exhale in relief to see that they will not be fighting each other, nor will they be facing Kojo in the first round. Kwesi notices their reaction and adds, "Do not get too comfortable. Each round will be more difficult than the last, and you never know who you will face next. Keep your focus and be prepared for anything." Kofi and Kwame nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had trained hard for this moment, and they were determined to give it their all. As the first round begins, they watch intently as their opponents engage in a fierce battle. The sound of clashing swords fills the air, and the crowd cheers on the combatants. Finally, the first round ends, and Kofi and Kwame step forward to take their place in the ring. They grip their swords tightly, their eyes fixed on their opponent. The judges give the signal, and the battle begins. Kofi and Kwame move swiftly, their swords glinting in the sunlight. They exchange blows, each trying to gain the upper hand. As the battle intensifies, Kofi and Kwame start to feel the strain of their efforts. Their muscles ache, and their breathing becomes labored. But they push on, determined to come out on top. Finally, after what seems like an eternity, the battle ends. Kofi and Kwame emerge victorious, but they know they cannot afford to let their guard down. They take a deep breath, ready for the next round. Kofi and Kwame were looking at the list of pairings for the final round, and Kwame's face turned pale when he saw that he was matched up against Kojo. Kofi noticed the fear in his friend's eyes and put a hand on his shoulder. "Hey man, you got this. You're a great swordsman, and you've been training hard for this." "I know," Kwame replied, his voice shaky. "But Kojo is one of the best. I don't know if I can beat him." Meanwhile, Kofi was scanning the list to see who his opponent was. He saw the name Otto. Otto is the son of a blacksmith. He is well known for his physique. He is tall and muscular, with broad shoulders and strong arms. His skin is a deep, rich brown, and his hair is cut close to his scalp. He carries himself with confidence and moves with ease. His eyes are a piercing dark brown, and when he looks at Kofi, there is a sense of intensity that radiates from him. As Kofi walked up to him, he noticed the rough calluses on Otto's hands, evidence of his father's profession. Otto introduced himself and shook Kofi's hand firmly. "Good luck," Otto said, his voice low and steady. Kofi nodded and took his place on the dueling platform, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. He knew that this final challenge would be the toughest yet, but he was determined to give it his all. As the duel between Kofi and Otto began, the atmosphere was tense. The two fighters circled each other, eyes locked in fierce determination. Otto's impressive physique was on full display as he expertly wielded his sword, his movements fluid and precise. Meanwhile, Kwame and Kojo's battle was just as intense. The two fighters moved quickly, their swords clashing in a rapid succession of blows. Kwame fought with everything he had, but it was clear that Kojo was a formidable opponent. As the battles raged on, Kwesi stood at the edge of the arena, watching with rapt attention. "This is the best duel I've seen in the past decade," he whispered to the person standing next to him. "These young men are truly remarkable." The tension in the air was palpable as the battles came to a close. Kwame, exhausted but determined, fought valiantly but was ultimately defeated by Kojo. The crowd gasped and then cheered as Kojo raised his sword in victory. Kwame looked disappointed but proud, having put up a good fight. Meanwhile, Kofi had managed to outsmart Otto with a clever trick, disarming him and winning the battle. The crowd erupted in cheers as Kofi was declared the winner. Kofi couldn't believe it, the rush of victory and pride overwhelming him. As the dust settled and the cheering subsided, Kwesi stepped forward to address the competitors. "You have all shown exceptional skill and bravery," he said, his voice echoing through the arena. "It is an honor to have witnessed your strength and perseverance. Congratulations to Kofi and Kojo, the champions of this year's competition." The competitors bowed respectfully as the king stood and applauded their efforts. They had all proven themselves worthy of the honor and recognition that came with being a champion. The moment the king stood up to speak, the entire arena fell silent. All eyes were on him as he surveyed the crowd with a somber expression. The tension in the air was palpable, and everyone held their breath, waiting for his next words. "Congratulations to our new kingsguard, Kofi and Kojo." A cheer erupted from the crowd, and Kofi and Kojo looked at each other in disbelief, still processing the fact that they had been chosen as the new kingsguard. However, the joy was short-lived as the king's tone turned serious once again. "I cannot ignore the talent that has been displayed here today," he continued. "Otto and Kwame, welcome to the kingsguard." The crowd was stunned into silence, as they realized what the king was implying. This was unprecedented. Never in the history of the kingdom had there been 4 new members of the king's guard in one day. The king's words hung heavy in the air as he continued, "This means that next year, there will be no competition for the king's guard." The weight of the king's announcement slowly sunk in, and tears began to stream down the faces of the competitors and the crowd alike. The king's final words echo throughout the room, "May the bond of the king's guard, forged through the fires of competition and trials, last for generations to come." The crowd cheers. As the sun sets on the kingdom, the 4 young men stand side by side. They look at each other and smile, knowing that they will face many challenges together as members of the king's guard. But for now, they are just 4 young boys who had a dream and made it a reality. They raise their swords in unison, and the crowd cheers, celebrating their victory.